Outreach is a big part of what really made me a spine surgeon, knowing that I could help people in a special way. I knew from an early time point that I couldn't have a desk job. When I was in medical school, I saw a couple of pediatric surgeons putting in pedicle screws to fix scoliosis, and I was just instantly hooked. I mean, I'm a short Indian guy, I'm a little loud. Eventually, everybody I worked with knew that I wasn't going to take no for an answer. So I started my own practice, maybe at the worst time in history, February 1st, 2020.
That was the perfect time. What do you mean?
Actually, full disclosure, I'm a total spine nerd. And so
that's good. This is the guy you want to do spine surgery on. Welcome back to another episode of Raspberry Lemonade. We have another amazing guest. We only have amazing guests on the show. Today we have a local spine surgeon, Dr. Verma. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, little interesting backstory of how we came to meet, how we connected. I was snooping around Long Beach Local News Instagram, and you popped up in one of those videos. So we'll get into a little bit more of the importance of having an online presence and like using social media. But how long ago did you say you had that, or you had done that?
I think it was last year, middle of last year. We had the opportunity to get interviewed and showcase our practice. So we did, and kind of one thing leads to another. So it was great.
Yeah. And now we're here. Exactly. So let's get right into it. You're a spine surgeon. How the heck did you even get into that? How long have you been doing it? Give us a little more background on that.
Well, to be a spine surgeon, it's kind of a long path of training. Usually it's a minimum of 4 years of medical school after undergrad, plus 5 years of residency if you go through orthopedics, plus at least a year of spine fellowship. There's also the neurosurgery pathway, which is kind of like 7 years of training after medical school. And if you go the orthopedic route, you learn more hips and knees and operating on bone. If you go the neurosurgery route, you learn brain and you learn spine. Of course, I'm biased because I really like the orthopedic approach. And I think I got into medicine and got into spine very organically. I mean, it is really more about personality than anything else. I knew from an early time point that I couldn't have a desk job, and I had my initial bachelor's degree in engineering because my mind definitely works in that way since I was young. And then near the end of engineering school, I definitely said, well, this is not for me. I'm not going to sit behind a desk. I'm not going to do this. And so I kind of pivoted near the end of medical school, even got a master's degree and applied to medical school. Did research and lived in New York, and through good fortune, I think was able to match in NYU, which was the same place I was doing research. And then I did my medical school for 4 years there. When I was in medical school, I had a strong interest, believe it or not, in high-risk pregnancy. Now, why I would choose high-risk pregnancy as a specialty, who knows? But I did research in pregnancy. I thought it was very interesting and fascinating. I really got into it. And when I did the rotation, I remember in medical school, I hated it. It just was not a happy place. There were a few happy moments right when the baby is born, but the overall culture, I wouldn't say was particularly happy.
Oh, no. How so? What do you mean by that?
Well, I think, physicians and clinicians are under a lot of stress, and I think that's particularly evident in obstetrics because it's a high-risk specialty. They take a lot of call. They work a lot of nights. And I think they do deal with a lot of litigation when things don't go well.
Gotcha.
But deep down inside, I was drawn to being in a specialty that was a little bit more high-risk because I feel like I am good at talking to people about things that are risky. And then my personality is such that I, don't shy away from the challenge ahead of me. And so when I was in medical school, I saw a surgeon, a couple of pediatric surgeons putting in pedicle screws, which are screws that go in the spine to fix scoliosis. And I was just instantly hooked. I was like, this is the coolest surgery. I want to do this. I want to learn this. And I was very lucky that at NYU at that time, there were a lot of great scoliosis surgeons, both on the adult side and the pediatric side. As an eager young student, I said, please let me be involved. And one of my mentors, Baron Launer, who's still a good friend, and another mentor, Tom Errico, took me under their wing for a year. I did research with them in medical school pretty intensively for a year. And then after that, applied into residencies to be a spine surgeon. And during that year, I published a lot of papers. I got, kind of nerded out on spine surgery, and even got the opportunity to do charity work in Africa, which was also a really great experience for me because it pretty much allowed me to really see the power of the surgery in a charity outreach setting. We were doing 150-degree curves, 120-degree curves on kids. They have no access to care. It's all charity work. And then just the way that work makes you feel, the way it drives you as a person is just so powerful. And I have a couple of examples I'm happy to talk about. But it always stayed with me. I went back in residency in 2012 or 13, went back in 2016, I went back in 2022. I also have been to Mexico and Colombia. And I'm proud to say this is the first year I'm organizing my own trip to this one hospital, the Focus Hospital in Accra, Ghana. And we'll be doing the fundraising ourselves and organizing the trip ourselves. So, outreach is a big part of what really made me a spine surgeon. It's just knowing that I could help people in this special way.
Absolutely. A little bit that we discussed kind of off camera or a phone call. Actually, it might have been in person. With your practice, obviously there's a business aspect to it. How have you managed to still be profitable while doing good work? Because I think a lot of people kind of think that the two can't coexist.
Yeah, with some difficulty. I think your doctor hat has to be your first hat that you always wear. So I'm always a physician first. And I love to help people. I love to engage with people. I feed off the energy of others, and that's just who I am. And so that's at the core of everything I do. And then we don't learn anything about running a business or running a practice. And I'm actually
in medical school, they don't teach you that?
Not a
really?
thing. And so you kind of learn by doing. I was originally a professor in Seattle. Didn't like that job at the University of Washington, and particularly like that city. It was a little gloomy for me. And so I decided with my wife, let's move to LA. It's a big city. There's a lot of opportunity. We'll figure it out. I joined a group in kind of like the top of Orange County in Long Beach area. And then after a couple of years, I kind of saw that wasn't going to be the best way to really provide high quality care. A big group, it runs like a factory. Patients are in and out. Spine is not the priority. And the doctor doesn't have a ton of autonomy, really. I was doing hip fractures and things that are great when you're in training, but if you're going to be a super specialist, you really have to focus on your craft. So I started my own practice maybe at the worst time in history, February 1st, 2020. I opened the doors for my practice literally a month later.
That was the perfect time. What do you mean?
They shut down. Who would have thought that they would shut down surgery, elective surgery?
Yeah.
And so that made it quite challenging. I also didn't know what I was doing. Just to be very clear, I don't know how the billing works. I don't know how to manage staff. I don't know how to do marketing. I don't even know how the medical record system works. And gradually, just step by step, making friends with other surgeons, learning all the little things, you accumulate a pretty big sum of knowledge. And I always just put the patients first. And while I'm learning how to be a little bit better at running a business and the practice, I'm also learning how to be a better spine surgeon and clinician. And usually I do about 3 or 4 days a week of clinical work. And I carve out about a day or two a week into everything else, whether it's continuing medical education, watching other surgeons operate, whether it's reading books on leadership, whether it's focusing on marketing for the practice or restructuring this or that or working with my team. They're all different skills to sort of build and learn on. And I find that kind of exciting. And I think physicians and maybe surgeons specifically really value autonomy And I think when you have autonomy, you're able to deliver the best quality of care for your patients. And that's what they want. They want that close relationship with their doctor. And they want to know that their doctor is on the cutting edge. And spine specifically, I think more than a lot of surgical specialties, is one that is evolving quite rapidly. You know, we do the complex stuff like scoliosis way better than we did even 10 or 15 years ago. And on the more simple side of spine surgery, 1 and 2 level problems, it's becoming more minimally invasive. There's more disc replacement, more minimally invasive fusion techniques are coming out. And then the surgeries are gradually moving out of the hospital into the surgery centers. And that's really exciting. Yeah, it's great. I mean, patients are having spine surgery going home the same day. And I'm happy to be on I think the forefront of that movement, doing more disc replacement and more minimally invasive surgery, and witnessing better and better outcomes than I saw even 10 years ago when I started practice.
That's amazing. And you know what? It's funny, until this very moment, I didn't realize, maybe subconsciously I did, but my dad for many years had a lot of back pain because one of his discs were, well, I mean, I'm sure they still are, displaced. He's found a way to manage it. He hasn't had anything, too crazy since. But someone like him, who is in his late 50s now, obviously you'd have to kind of really see what he's dealing with. But would you say it's safer now for him to take on one of those surgeries that maybe at the time, maybe 10, 15 years ago, they said there was high risk?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of complexity in the diagnosis. And so a lot of times what I see in my clinic is people are seeing their therapist or pain doctor or chiropractor, which is all appropriate to try non-operative treatment. But a lot of times they don't have a diagnosis, a clear one. Is it 1 bad level? Is it 2? Is there scoliosis? Is there bone slipped out of place? Are the nerves pinched? I think all of this requires good imaging and some time with a surgeon. And then once we figure out what the problem is, then yes, usually there's a minimally invasive small surgery solution. And that's what I think is exciting about this specialty, is that direction of growth. The most common problems are spinal stenosis, where like a nerve can be pinched in your back, is probably the most typical thing I see. And then typically we'll try medications and therapy to try to calm it down. And then on the very least invasive side, you can do something like a laminectomy. You just drill a little bit of bone off the nerve, you try to free it up. It's done under a microscope. I think it's very safe. And that can provide great relief. In other situations, someone might need a fusion if a bone is slipped out of place or there's a scoliosis. What is exciting is that our techniques are a lot more advanced, I think, than even I saw 5 years ago. We're doing incisions that are this big to approach the spine.
Was that 1.5 inches or something?
About 1.5 inches, yeah, to approach the spine from the front, the side, or the back. And then using robotics or navigation technology, we're placing screws in the spine, sometimes percutaneously. And then the other advent is if you're working from an anterior or lateral approach, very often you're not having to drill bone off the nerve the same way. And so we can reduce the risk of surgery quite a bit too. And doing those things together really helps drive these cases to a surgery center, which makes it a much better experience for the patient. And then we're seeing a big trend towards disc replacement, replacing our fusions. Now, we always got to be careful with trends because patients will drive certain trends, but they may not necessarily have the best outcomes. But we do have data that shows our 10-year outcomes from disc replacement are better than cervical fusions, which is when we put in plate and screw constructs. And that means you can sort of maintain that range of motion of your spine while still addressing whatever nerve problem is there. That's a really exciting technology. And more we're seeing people do anterior lumbar fusions that are minimally invasive, and also anterior lumbar disc replacements that are minimally invasive. These procedures are being done in the surgery center, obviously with specialized skill, the right people. But I'm excited about that aspect of spine surgery for sure.
Yeah, sounds exciting. I mean, I don't know half the stuff you just said, but
I have to full disclosure. I'm a total spine nerd, and so
that's good. This is the guy you want to do spine surgery on.
I'll just go down the rabbit hole and I'll tell you everything I know, and all the places spine surgery has been and where I think it's going and how interesting it is. And I want my patients to be educated.
Yeah.
More than I want them to have surgery. I want them to spend time with me going over their imaging and let me explain all these different things to you. Because I feel like the informed patient is the best patient. They can make the best decisions for themselves, whether, hey, let's try to avoid surgery, or, you know what, let's move forward. And I understand what the procedure is, and it doesn't seem that risky, actually. Or maybe the risk is manageable. I think that's great. On the other side, the more complex surgeries, when I first started my practice, I was doing a ton of revisions. Basically, people that had 5, 10 surgeries, and they all failed.
Oh, wow.
You know, really challenging pathology with scar everywhere and previous fusions. I think it's a great way to build your surgical skill set. And I learned a lot. And I learned that those are challenging cases. But I also learned about what happened in the first couple of surgeries that led to this big complicated revision 10 years later. And it usually tended to be a couple of very key mistakes on that first or second surgery. And so now in my practice, we do everything possible to avoid those mistakes. And I'm happy to share what those mistakes are. Usually somebody gets a fusion, but they don't add enough curve to their spine, and they get a flat back deformity, and that causes chronic pain. Or they get a fusion and the bones don't really fuse together and all the hardware loosens up. We don't want to operate in that way. Or they get problems where the next level fails. They fix one level and the next one fails. Well, we have techniques to prevent that problem too. And then probably the fourth most egregious problem is they'll have surgery with a surgeon and they never see that person again. It's just like disappears. That surgeon disappears, the patient disappears. That's not good care. What you want is to have a really high quality surgery and then stand by that surgery, and that patient has an issue. You're always there. That practice is there. You're always caring for that patient for the duration of their life, in my opinion. And I think that's one of the things that sets us apart is we really care. We want all of our post-op patients back, even if you're doing well. Just come and see us once a year. We love it.
Yeah, just see how they're doing. I really love that. And I've seen, you post people sending you thank you cards or, many years later, like, hey, just once again, thank you so much for your help with XYZ. This is kind of me jumping towards a little bit a later question, but since we're on the subject, what's one of those cards that you've received that really stood out to you personally, and why? There's two of them, because I value both. I value the patient cards, and I also value the mentoring part of this job, because my whole practice is full of PAs and med students. And when I was in Seattle, there was a young student I mentored, not even for very long, but she wrote me this long, long letter about how grateful she was that no doctor had ever taken her into the OR before and taught her how to see and examine patients, and it just meant so much to her. And it actually means a lot to me too, because people did that for me along the way. They, mentored me and helped me and pushed me to become a spine surgeon, be a better surgeon, come to meetings. And so I value that quite a bit. Somebody took me to Africa that first time. I literally chased Dr. Boachi down at a meeting in Vienna, Austria. He had given a talk on charity work, and I chased him. I said, please take me with you. And he just said, sure. He said, I'll do some fundraising, and that really started it all. So the mentoring and teaching part is huge. And from the patient side, they all have my cell phone number when I operate on them, and the vast majority don't abuse it. But, recently I operated on a patient, that I didn't want to operate on right away. She was fairly young, in her 30s or 40s, had a really bad level. We tried a bunch of conservative treatments, but after a year or two, we decided to do the fusion on her. And it was a minimally invasive fusion. She was out of the surgery center in a day. And then I saw her stroll in with her bag, not even 2 weeks after surgery. I was like, wow, you're walking better. And then she just sent me a text. Oh, Dr. Verma, I'm snowboarding again. I haven't snowboarded in years with my kids. And this is a simple 45-minute to an hour kind of outpatient procedure, and it just drastically changes someone's life. I think that's great. When I was at the university, I would do a lot of really complex cases, and early in my career, I would videotape all of my patients
because I liked their stories of how disabled they were going into surgery. They couldn't even walk a block or 2 blocks. And now, they're walking unlimited distances. They're not disabled anymore. And I won't tell your last name. There's one patient, Lana, every year she sends me text messages. This is how I'm doing. Dr. Verma, your surgery was incredible. I was disabled for years. 7 years later, 8 years later, she's still texting me. And for that patient, I remember we did, I think a 6-hour reconstruction, T10 to the pelvis, with a procedure where we take a big wedge of bone out, dissect out all the nerves, and reshape the spine. Risky surgery, but she did so exceptionally well. And she was so grateful that I love those stories, and I think there's so much value in just talking to your patients. There was another patient in fellowship that had a really complex surgery, had to take everything out. We did a big reconstruction from basically bottom of the neck all the way down to the pelvis.
Oh, wow.
And then unfortunately, I remember she got infected and we had to open up her wound and wash her out. She got readmitted. She had to go to it just was it was a rough recovery for that first month or two. A lot of bumps in the road, but thankfully no major medical problems. She did well ultimately, but I thought this woman hated us. I was sure of it. And then I asked her at the 3-month visit, how's it going? And she told me a story about how grateful she was for the surgery and how she thanks God every day and how she was living in chronic pain and she didn't want to live anymore. And the surgery completely changed her life. And even her bad days, she thanks God for those bad days because it was so bad before. So it's just the power of spine surgery to change a person's life is really compelling. And now we pin all these thank you cards in our board, in our office. And it's what keeps me going because it's definitely physical. It's a physical job. It's definitely stressful at times. The vast majority of people that come in are anxious, super anxious when they come to see a spine surgeon. And a big part of my job is to try to just make them feel comfortable. But yeah, those thank you cards, they personally mean a lot to your surgeon. If your surgeon cares, then those thank you cards mean a lot. So thanks for sending them. And
keep sending them, folks. That's a great spot, I think, to take a little break. I like to do something on the show where we do a little water break. Would you mind?
Sure, I love water.
All right. This is a reminder to stay hydrated. Got to stay hydrated. Take a sip or two. This water break is brought to you by Valores Studios. We were talking a little bit off air of kind of what that involves. We like working with established business owners and entrepreneurs who are looking to either establish their online presence or if they already have one, just to elevate it that much more. We also help them create video assets for internal and external business reasons to be able to leverage their time. Really just anything that comes to do or has to do with video, we want to be there for them, kind of like you are with your patients. We want to be there every step of the way, helping them, guiding them to their next step. And as far as marketing goes, as far as expanding their team, et cetera, et cetera. So naturally I have to ask, how are you currently using video for your business?
So I have a videographer friend. Actually, I met him on a sailing trip I took with the Sailing Virgins. I think you're going to be interviewing the CEO of that company soon. He was a good friend and brilliant, business-minded entrepreneur, really has a good handle on marketing. And so the videographer on that trip is somebody that came out and filmed a bunch of content for me. I think you were at the opening party when he was there.
Wait, don't Chris, was
Chris,
it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm gradually just making more and more content. Every time I'm in surgery, I often ask the implant people, shoot a little, content of surgery, obviously protecting all patient privacy, parts of that. But I think it's important to tell the story of spine surgery because it's just so variable. if you go out there in the community and you ask people, what do you think about spine surgery? You don't hear anything positive. It's a lot of negative. And it's because there's a lot of different spine surgeons out there. There's variability in training. There's variability in surgical approaches. The specialty is evolving very quickly. And I don't know that everybody is focusing on taking care of what I think is a special patient population. These people are vulnerable, they're anxious, they're in pain, and you have the ability to really change their life in a dramatic way. And it's a real gift and an honor to be able to help people this way and make a living out of it. And I just think it's very special.
Yeah.
For sure.
I really appreciate the fact that you're aware of that. The fact that you're in a place that not a lot of people get to experience, as far as helping a fellow human being with something so intimate, I guess you could say. You know, literally without our bodies, like, life would be so much different. Like, if even you stubbing a toe sometimes, you know, will take you out for a few minutes. I can only imagine someone who is going through a rough time because of something spine related. And that's like one of the biggest parts of the body with the movement and all that. I could see how impactful, you know, you being in this line of work really is. And I could tell that you don't take it for granted.
I appreciate that. I can tell you some of the challenges as well. I mean, dealing with insurance companies, even in the last 5 years, has gotten so difficult.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Let's talk about that.
Oh, it's probably the most challenging part of running a business is, you know, they keep changing the rules. They keep cutting rates for doctors in surgery, and we want to be there to help patients, but the economics of it just really don't work. And, you know, even Medicare, our government insurance, used to be a pretty reliable payer. You know, for 6 months, I don't think we've been paid on our surgeries. And then they keep cutting the rates, and we get paid less and less every year, even though the cost of running a practice in any business goes up with time. But we don't want to turn people away, so we say yes. And so that's been a constant challenge. And then, unfortunately, even our commercial insurances sort of run a monopoly, and they post large profits but deny so many surgeries and then underpay doctors for their surgeries. I did an audit of surgery I did in 2023 with my biller. I was like, well, how did we do? Let's look at all of this. And even when we signed contracts with the insurance companies, we were unpaid or underpaid on 1/3 of the surgeries that we did.
Wow.
Which is just shocking to me, where we have to keep appealing, please pay us, here's medical records. And eventually, you know, the biller gets worn out. We all get worn out. They want you to just give up. And that happens on the front end, too. They don't approve anything. We have to keep asking for authorizations. Patients get frustrated. And often the doctor is in the middle of it. Mm-hmm. We're between the patient and their insurance company. And so we just want everyone's trust. I'm there to help everyone. I'm there to fight the battles for you guys. It sometimes takes a little time. And, you know, we need our patients' cooperation. And as a whole, our practice is committed to reducing the patient out-of-pocket responsibilities as low as possible. But it's kind of a moving target. And I sort of reevaluate things every quarter. But, you know, there's some new strategies with billing that I think are going to work out. And we try to have a balanced practice so that we can do a good amount of charity work, you know, but not be overwhelmed with it.
Right. Makes sense. What do you say we get to the more personal side of the podcast?
Love it.
Tell us a little bit about, okay, first of all, I hear people call you different names. What would you like me to call you?
Well, if it's professionally, you probably should call me Dr. Verma if we're in the office or seeing patients or the hospital. Personally, people call me Kush.
Okay.
But I always worry about people calling me Dr. Kush because they get the wrong idea. And I'm always like, Dr. Verma.
May I call you Kush then?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
You're my friend.
Thank you.
Yeah, personally, everyone just calls me Kush.
All right. What was little Kush like?
Oh, he was wild. Full of energy. He's just like my son, Devin. Just people pleaser, people lover, wanted to talk and hang out with everybody, running around, tons of energy. Difficulty sitting down at a desk. I still have that problem. I am not built for a desk job.
You're doing pretty well in this interview. You're like very well put together. You know, you're staying in place.
I'm not a fidgeter, but talking to people is all I do for a living. I talk to people and I operate. That's about 80% of what I do. I'm either talking to my staff or talking to the patients, talking to the hospital, admins, nurses. And then the other part of it is operating. And there's a small amount that's probably computer work, dictating notes and things like that.
Yeah. So you were a squirmy child.
Oh my God, quite the bit. I mean, I probably even have what people call ADHD. And there's I read books about ADHD when I was younger. And in school, because I had a hard time studying in medical school, just sitting there for 14 hours. I was bored out of my mind. And I would come up with all these creative ways to keep myself engaged. I would always doodle while I was studying. I would always listen to high energy music. I would sometimes force myself to study in a place with zero distractions in the basement of the darkest library so I could really just dive into the material. But it was still difficult, you know. And if you read about it, a lot of surgeons are those types of people that just aren't drawn to those types of desk jobs. They can't do it. And they tend to be drawn to high-risk careers and high-risk specialties, and I think spine probably falls in that category. Surgery falls in that category. And so that's kind of what I was like as a kid.
Is there anything from your childhood that maybe a personality trait, a way of approaching things that you kind of still see in yourself even today, especially when it relates to business?
Yeah, you know, I grew up as an immigrant. My dad is very smart. He's academic smart. He was a Fulbright scholar. He immigrated here in 1979. Economics major, and my parents came here with nothing, like a couple $100, a couple of suitcases. You know, my mom was pregnant with me when she moved here, and my sister was 7. And I think that first decade, you know, he was in like graduate housing and struggling. I'm sure he's getting his PhD. I think it was very difficult for them. And then they started to get a little bit of success in the early 90s. My dad got a more stable job. We were finally able to buy a house in 1992, kind of really get a little bit of that American dream. But it took a long time. And I think I just learned that hard work is the only way. You know, it is the only way to really get ahead. And you have to be able and willing to outwork the people around you. Tell everyone you're not willing to take no for an answer when it comes to your career. This is what you want, and you deep in your heart believe you're going to be good at it. And then the doors will just open up. So that's kind of been my experience growing up. I definitely wasn't the smartest kid in high school, but I got into an Ivy League school because I did a really cool science fair project and really blew people away. It was creative and different. And in college, I don't know that I had the perfect, science GPA to get into the perfect med school, but I was an engineer and I was pre-med and I did all this research. And I ultimately got a master's degree, and that's how I got into a pretty nice med school. And then after med school, again, we were always judged by standardized tests, and I always would stand out with the research and my letters of recommendation, and that's how I got into residency and fellowship. And so I think there's lots of different kinds of intelligence. Not everyone is going to be a perfect bookworm. Yeah. Just don't take no for an answer. And I'll tell you a funny story. So the first week of residency, all the residents were meeting each other. It was just like scrubs first week. I met my wife, and maybe the first conversation we had, and we were friends at the time, she told me she didn't get into dermatology. That's what she wanted to do. And only a person like me would say this. I said, well, don't take no for an answer. You can get in. Just try. Try harder, And she probably thought it was weird, and I'm sure she did. But we became friends. I hooked her up with my friend who was just gotten into derm residency, and she did some research. She didn't get discouraged. And then you know what? She got in the next year.
Hey, there you go.
And then we started dating, and then we still talk about it. Those were the first words I said to her. And then, I've done that for everybody I've met. Countless students have rotated in and out of our practice, gotten into med school, gotten into residency. There was a student I mentored he was a medical student when I was a young professor in Seattle. This is like 8 years ago. And the chairman there at University of Washington basically didn't have a lot of encouraging words for him in terms of getting into orthopedics.
Basically told him, you suck. You're never getting in.
I'm not exactly
Something
sure.
to the like.
I'm not exactly sure, but
not very motivating. We'll put it that way.
And this med student was paired up with me, a young attending, and I basically said, don't take no for an answer. You got to do some research, take some time, and apply broadly. In a year or two. Don't only want to go to the California program where the weather is beautiful. Go all over the country. Be open to training wherever, but don't take no for an answer. And sure enough, got his residency in the Midwest. He did a rotation with me a few years ago. And he's like, I want to do spine surgery. He even did an outreach trip. Now he's doing the final stage of his training in Orange County. And would you believe he's going to be in Orange County too?
Well, look at that.
Be, probably in different practices, but
basically
he's
neighbors.
Basically my mentee, my friend, and now my neighbor and fellow spine surgeon.
That's awesome.
And it's just, it's a perfect example of why you really can't ever take no for an answer when it comes to your career. All these barriers that we see that are there are mostly perceived. If it's something you really want, eventually that door will open. I really do believe it.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be a clip right there. What do you say?
Powerful motivator when it comes to your career.
I love that. Yes. Yeah, and you got to be your biggest fan.
Yeah, and I came from nothing. I mean, I'm a short Indian guy. I'm a little loud, and I love people. And no, the doors for going into orthopedic surgery and spine surgery were not wide open. But eventually everybody I worked with knew that I wasn't going to take no for an answer. I remember one of my mentors in med school was like, well, what are you going to do if you don't get in? What's your plan B? I'm like, I don't have a plan B. This is what I'm doing. And then once the people around you realize, like, he's going to do this, they start advocating for you a bit more. They start seeing that you really have passion for it. And I'm starting to even think that we can manifest the success that we want if we truly believe in it. And I just knew it's what I wanted. And I'm still growing. I look at myself 5 years ago. I think I'm a different surgeon than I was 5 years ago. Techniques are changing. I'm changing. I'm maturing as a surgeon. I see things differently, maybe with more compassion and humility with age. But I'm also learning some of the newer, more cutting-edge techniques in spine surgery, which I think are really exciting. I didn't see these things 10 years ago as much,
Yeah.
Like some of the innovations with disc replacement and minimally invasive surgery and robotics. They have a place, and they're great.
Right on. What do you say we get into now the sweet and sour stories?
Yeah, let's do it.
We'll start with the sour because we like ending on a high note.
Okay.
Since starting your practice, what has been one of the toughest, challenging, maybe excruciating experiences that you've gone through, and how'd you overcome it?
Well, I think there's several that come to mind. There's the business side. The frustration of trying to run a business is, I can go through we have a whole separate podcast about that. And then there's the patient side. The patient side is always most important to me. You could be the greatest surgeon in the world. You're going to have outcomes that aren't perfect. And if you're a surgeon like me and you do complex spine surgery, you're going to take on more risk and do more complex cases. And inevitably, there will be cases that don't go the way you want them to go. In one of the studies on spinal deformity surgery and complex surgery, they quoted like a 70% complication rate. And I think one of my mentors, I remember Tom Errico used to say the complication rate's 100%. He would tell that to patients up front, which basically meant expect a bump in the road. And even if you set all these expectations, it's inevitable that a patient you really like and care about is going to have an issue or a complication that you don't want. And it's more common in our older patients above 65 and 70 years old. It's more common when we're doing very complex surgeries. So we tend to be fairly conservative with that category of patient. But, you know, I've got stories of, for as many stories I have, you know, that are wonderful, I do have heartbreaking stories. Like, you know, I had one a couple years ago where it just didn't go the way I wanted. The patient was not doing well, and it was affecting my sleep. It was bumming. For a little while, I was just like, you know, I'm not doing any more complex surgery for a couple of months. I'm taking a break. And my wife was very smart. She's like, you should journal. And so I would like write down my thoughts, and it really did help. And I had to give myself some time to be like, you know what, this is part of being a doctor. You're not going to have all positive experiences. You're going to have some negatives. And for me, you know, especially like, you know, in that situation, late 70-year-old patient, it's, you know, it's sometimes heroic, the types of surgery we're trying to do to give them their mobility back. And so that stays with me. Everyone, I remember all their names, remember all their stories. So there's definitely that. And without going into too much more detail, giving away that patient's history, I mean, every couple of years there's something that can be a little heartbreaking. And that's why I really gravitate towards the outreach work, because it does rejuvenate the surgeon's soul. You know, when you go do outreach work, it really just fills you with gratitude and ambition and motivation. And it keeps you passionate about what you do as a doctor. And I think that's really important. On the business side, I think starting a practice, you know, a month before the pandemic started was a huge frustration. I was bankrupt most of that year. I don't think we made any money until they finally approved our PPP loan and a disaster loan. And that was until the end of the year. We were a small company, so no one was paying attention to us. No one was handing us a PPP loan or anything like that. So it was just wild. And then, you know, things get a little better, but then they start cutting reimbursements. And so we have to change billers. And then we were initially starting in a small sublet office space. We outgrew that space, redesigning and moving and changing offices. You know, it is a lot of work. And I do what probably no one would do if it was like a big company. I'm happy to hold my salary and reinvest into the business to make it better. I do it all the time. And I think not every year has been like a great profitable year. In fact, some years you would look at what I do and be like, it's questionable if you should be on your own or join this group or join this university. But I believe in the vision our company has. I believe in the long term. I believe that what we do is exceptional and that we're growing and patients love us. And, you know, whatever billing problems and staffing problems and marketing stuff, we'll figure it out and we'll get better. And I'm already seeing that sort of trend in that direction. And so that's exciting. But, you know, when I think about surgeons that sometimes come out of training and land in that perfect job with perfect people in the perfect location, I'm like, whoa, I had a much more challenging path. But I think it gives you character, it gives you grit. I think, you know, if you build it for yourself, no one can take it away from you, which is right. How I think.
Yeah, absolutely. You said you were probably bankrupt that whole first year.
Yeah, I was.
How, like in practice, I'm trying to figure out, because I believe the average is when anyone starts their own business, it's like the first 3 years, you just kind of have to mentally prepare for the fact that you're not going to make any money or something like that, right? How do you keep the lights on at home then? Like, or how did you prepare? Did you prepare for something like that, or was it completely out of the, you know, left field? And,
you know, right before I started in 2019, I have a friend and a mentor. He actually owns a large practice in LA called Docs, Kaver Sadiq. He gave me the advice that you need to have 6 months of money for your business and 6 months of money personally tucked away before you start. And I can't remember if he said this or somebody else said it. Plan for a disaster. So I didn't quite have 6 months, but I did plan for disaster a little bit. And sure enough, disaster came.
That's some solid advice.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And, you know, our healthcare system is a little broken. I mean, I'll often operate on, our older patients, do something like a laminectomy. And just as an example, the Medicare will pay us $1,000 to do that surgery, but it costs us about $50,000 or $60,000 just to run one office.
Yeah.
So you can imagine I can't do 50 surgeries a month. So the finances just don't make any sense.
Yeah.
So we have to be very creative. We have to balance our payer mix. We have to always kind of keep an eye on things and see that it makes sense financially. So that's always a challenge. And if the patients are good patients, they're kind and they want to be helped, and I can help them, I usually will do whatever I can to make sure they get helped, either by me or a different practice. And so we've luckily not had to turn away a lot of people from surgery, but it's been a bit of a challenge. The whole healthcare side is just kind of a mess. And I think patients feel it too. I don't even understand how insurance works half the time, and I run my own business. Yeah. How is a patient going to figure this out?
Exactly. Oh my. What do you say we flip the script then? Let's talk about now the sweet side of you starting your practice. Well, it's been one of those really nice, juicy stories where you're just like, well, this is why I do this, like
there's in a good way. Fear, there's a lot of fear going off on your own, starting your own practice. Like, are you going to be successful? Is anyone going to come see you? That group you just left doesn't have nice things to say about you, right? So I think the first thing that kind of kept me going is that, I had been with a group and I was operating in town for a couple of years, and I had several hundred patients, and when I left, almost every single patient followed me to my new practice. That made me feel good. They chased me down. They didn't even know where I was. They found me, they Googled me, they looked for me, they found, and that told me, I'm doing something right. And then they all have my cell phone. They text me, "Where are you, Dr. Verma?" Like,
where'd you go? Don't hide from us.
Yeah, which I really appreciated that. That gave me some energy to keep going. I think what I didn't appreciate about starting my own practice is how dependent I am on other people to do this. It kind of just makes you a leader really quickly, and not the kind of leader that's maybe in like a Hollywood movie that's like barking out orders. It's the opposite. I spend so much of my time worrying about the staff in the hospital and the staff that helps me in the office, because I can't do any of it without them. And they're all young people, eager, hungry, PAs, med students. They've learned all these different intricacies about scheduling patients and insurance and authorization. They've done it all. And, that knowledge is sort of carefully passed down from employee to employee. And, I'm really humbled by it. Like, you have to be able to lead people and have them help you. And they're not going to help you because you're their boss and you're paying their bills or you're paying them a salary. You want them to care about you as a doctor, the patients, the mission of the business. And I think that is really what leadership is about. And that's been one of the best parts of having my own practice, is being a little bit of a leader in my own group and helping to drive the practice where I want, and helping young people get into PA school or med school or nursing school, whatever they're working towards. And I've also gotten to collaborate with a lot of small business owners and learn. I mean, who would thought that me going on a sailing trip would lead to me being friends with the owner of Sailing Virgins, and that person would give me great advice about marketing and find me a videographer. It's just like one thing leads to another. And so I love that part of it. It's like you kind of have creative expression doing what you do on your own. The other thing I really like is the autonomy. I mean, if you work for a group and they're owned by some financial entity, their priority is not going to be you or the patients. It's going to be money, running the business to be more successful. Whereas our priority is being exceptional to patients, growing, but also me being the best surgeon I can and having autonomy and having freedom. And so I do have the freedom to hey, I want to take a week off and go on an outreach trip, no one's going to stop me. I want to go, to the Scoliosis Research Society conference, I can do it. And no one will stop me. And in my other jobs, I didn't have that autonomy, there was always somebody, maybe, oh, you can't go to this hospital, or you can't work at this surgery center, or you can't grow your practice like this, or, why are you going on a charity trip? Why are you doing, these educational activities? You should just be staying here and cranking out cases. There's none of that, and I think it's made me a better doctor over time, which I think is probably the best benefit. Is if you're able to do exactly what you want, you really enjoy your job a lot better. A little more stress running it all, but I've been lucky. I have good people helping me.
That's awesome. You also mentioned, your outreach work. When's your next, what do you even call it, trip?
So I'm so happy you asked me about outreach. It's probably the thing I care about the most outside of my practice here in the States, because it had such a good impact on me. And I think it has an even more powerful impact when you're early in your career. And I give lectures about it. I'll be giving a talk in May at the HOI symposium about this to other surgeons, the value of outreach, how it's, I think, a cure for burnout. And it's just such a wonderful thing to do. I've been going to this one hospital in Accra, Ghana since 2009. And I have just gotten to interact with so many great surgeons. There's so many great stories that come out of this. You come back from a trip like that, you're rejuvenated as a doctor, and you're more ambitious, you're more productive when you come back. And there's also the charity part of it. You're just out there helping people. You want nothing in return. Well, that's what healthcare is all about. And so that's always a part of what I do in my practice. There's a component of charity, always. We try to be profitable as a whole, but there's a lot of charity that we do where I'm like, well, this person needs help, we're going to do it. And a lot of that comes from my outreach experience. And there's Arthur and Dr. Yankee are two surgeons out in Ghana. They were trained by Professor Boachi, and I operated with them when I was a resident. And I went back a few years ago and I operated with them again. It was so great. And then the photos that come out of these trips, you expect the kids in Africa to be these sad, disenfranchised kids, and it's quite the opposite. They are just jumping for joy, super happy, like kids anywhere, but just really happy, well-adjusted kids. And the way the hospital is set up is they'll have, the cafeteria, they have a rehab area, they have some kids that are awaiting surgery that are actually in this thing called traction, where they're kind of pulling up on their head to keep the curve from getting worse. And these kids are just running around in their traction devices, playing and laughing. You get to interact with the kids, have breakfast with them, then you go and operate, then you come back. It's like a really immersive experience. It's really wonderful. I haven't gone on a trip anywhere where it hasn't changed me or the people around me in some profound way. And I've been to the Dominican Republic. I've been to Mexico a few times. I've been to Colombia a few times. I've been to Africa several times. And I just keep wanting to go back. It's almost better than vacation for a surgeon in terms of rejuvenating you to be more passionate about what you do. And I'm very proud to say that this is the first year we're going to Africa. I'm bringing Kaber Sadiq, who's a good friend of mine, and Jeremy Smith, who's another good friend of mine and fellow complex spine surgeon. And we're doing our first self-funded, self-organized trip, which means we're doing all the fundraising ourselves. We're not beholden to any other entity. And we're going to go do this all on our own. And I hope from this we can continue to grow a pattern of more and more surgeons being interested in outreach from this area, and then gradually get a fund together so that it can be done every year.
That's awesome. Do you guys have a name you guys are working under, or kind of
right now it's all
that?
under Advanced Spine Care. Okay. But the hospital we're going to is the FOCOS, FOCOS, Foundation for Orthopedics and Complex Spine in Africa. And we're going to go support that hospital. But that's a hospital that has some orthopedics and stuff that they're doing, but there's 5,000 kids waiting for spine surgery.
Wow.
In Accra, Ghana. and there's just no funding to do it. So we're not only donating our time, of course, to go do the surgeries, we're also raising the money to actually get the surgery done so that we can support the hospital and everything else. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So Africa's a unique situation where they're really low on resources, you know, and so it's different everywhere you go. And the one thing I've learned about doing outreach is the most important thing is not being the hero spine surgeon from America coming and doing as many cases as possible and leaving. It's the opposite. It's your relationship with the country and the surgeons you meet there, the teaching, the mentorship, and then doing cases so they go well and are safe, you know, and the outcomes are good, because that is what keeps this program sustainable, you know, because you're not going to get all the surgeries done. But what you want to do is sort of change the culture and get more and more surgeons gradually involved and interested in it, and then train surgeons over there so they're better at it. And then, I mean, right now, the 2 surgeons that are in Africa, they're phenomenal surgeons, because so many U.S. surgeons have been coming and going for 15 years to this one hospital to do charity work. So it's been great to see how that place has changed over 15 years. And
that's amazing.
Bringing 2 of my good friends with me, which will be great.
When did you say that trip is happening this year?
It's going to be the week after the SRS meeting, the Scoliosis Research Society meeting, and I think it's September 21st to 29th. You know, we're going to obviously be very interested in getting fundraising support for this in future years and keep it going. But this is our first year that we're kind of getting it off the ground.
Wonderful. Happy to, you know, plug in. I don't know if you guys have some sort of website or something like that, but happy to plug whatever you do have when you have it into the description of the show, so that anyone who wants to support, maybe knows other surgeons, can get them involved as well. Yeah,
that's the ultimate goal with some of this marketing stuff, is to have a wing of our practice, you know, be like, I don't know if it's a GoFundMe or what, where we can have the money kind of go to a fund and it just 100% goes to the hospital. So we don't want it to be anything else other than 100% for the kids.
Wonderful. Second to last question, actually. We're at the final stages of the show. This is a music-related question. Yeah. Being that you mentioned that you were a bit of a active child, you still are an active person, you love people. I am assuming that you like music.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, if you had to choose your current life soundtrack, just one song that kind of describes how life's going, maybe the vibe, if you will, what song would that be?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I really like a lot of EDM music, even though I'm kind of an older guy now.
I had a feeling.
I'm really into this, the wave of EDM music that's really come out. I would say my probably favorite EDM song is Rufus Du Sol, Inner Bloom, which really it's like there's no lyrics, right? But it seems to just get everybody calm in the room. The first few years I was operating, I never listened to music. I was like kind of nervous, focused on what I was doing. And then, you know, you'd find out that people in the operating room were having a bad day, or there was some negative energy here or there. And I started listening to EDM music in the OR, and everyone's just happier. The vibe in the room is better, and surgery all of a sudden is going a little better. Everyone's better. And so I think my soundtrack definitely has a lot of EDM in it, and probably a lot of Rufus Du Sol, and maybe probably starts out with Inner Bloom.
That's awesome. I'll have to look into that. My wife is into EDM.
Yeah, she knows that song.
I'm pretty sure she does. So okay, that's awesome, and like expected, but also not expected. So yeah. I love that song choice. I guess, you know, before we hit the last question here, happy to call you friend, Kush.
Absolutely. Levi.
Thank you so much for being on the show, making the time, sharing your story, and you're doing some great things. I'm excited to see where it goes. Happy to support any way I can. But yeah, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And I really appreciate your time and letting me talk about both outreach work and advanced spine care. To me, they're interlocked, and I have a vision for where I want this practice to grow in terms of maybe recruiting other surgeons or multiple locations. We're kind of in the process of expanding. And I think, it's all because of the patients. They're more in control than we know. We just want to get the word out, and we want to just keep doing good work in the community.
Absolutely. Where can people continue to follow your journey online?
So I think we have an Instagram, Advanced Spine Care, which is asc.md. You can follow us there. You can also follow my own Instagram, Kushagra Verma MD. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but Kushagra Verma, Verma MD. And those are good areas where we're going to be consistently putting in content. Also our website, advancedspinecare.com. We have quite a bit of content on there. And then patients can read about me on Google and Yelp as well. There's a lot of patient reviews and surgery reviews. People seem to learn a lot about surgery and spine surgery and the experience just hearing it from other patients. I think that's great.
Yeah. And it's the best recommendations that you can get from someone who's actually worked with you. So definitely check that out. We'll put all that into the description as far as, social media and your website. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today. It's been a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it, being a guest on the show. Directing to the audience now. If you found any value whatsoever on this specific episode, please consider subscribing. And I also will challenge you, if you know someone who you think might benefit from listening to this specific episode, be a friend and share it with them. So with that said, thanks again for joining us on another episode of Raspberry Lemonade. We'll see you on the next episode.
This has been a Redbird Studio Productions. Hope you've enjoyed the program.